No one noticed the dog at first. That was the point. Ranger lay stretched beneath seat 2A, his black coat blending into the shadowed floor of the Boeing 737's first-class cabin. His muzzle rested on his paws, eyes half-lidded, chest rising and falling in a slow, controlled rhythm that mimicked sleep. To the casual observer, he looked old, another retired service animal dozing through a routine flight. A few gray hairs dusted his snout. One ear folded slightly where shrapnel had once torn through cartilage years ago. But Ranger was not sleeping. Every vibration of the aircraft flowed through his body. He felt the pressure changes before the cabin lights dimmed. He counted footsteps by weight and rhythm. He cataloged smells the way other beings remembered faces: cheap cologne, reheated coffee, synthetic fabric, human anxiety disguised as boredom. Ranger had learned long ago that danger rarely announced itself loudly. It whispered, it hid, it waited. Above him, Captain Jack Mercer sat rigidly upright, eyes fixed forward, hands folded as if he were a nervous civilian afraid of flying. Anyone watching would have assumed he was another middle-aged veteran clinging to routine, another man quietly aging out of relevance. They would have been wrong. Mercer's spine was straight from decades of discipline. His breathing was timed to Ranger, without conscious effort. A faint scar curved along his jawline, nearly hidden beneath a trimmed beard. The sleeves of his jacket covered arms that still carried the muscle memory of violence. He had learned to look harmless. The world was easier that way. The plane hummed steadily as it climbed, engines droning like distant thunder. Passengers settled into their rituals, earbuds in, magazines open, drinks poured. A young couple laughed softly over a shared screen. A businessman tapped impatiently at his tablet. A mother across the aisle bounced her infant, whispering reassurances as the seatbelt sign chimed off. Normal life. That was what Mercer had wanted when he booked the flight. Normal life was the promise he had made to himself after retirement. No missions, no radios, no call signs that belonged to men who never came home. Just a seat by the window, a destination, and the one companion who had followed him through hell and back. Ranger shifted slightly beneath the seat. Mercer felt it immediately. His fingers twitched once, then stilled. He didn't look down. Looking would draw attention. Ranger's ears had rotated backward, then forward again, a subtle movement no one else would notice. His breathing changed, not faster, not slower, just focused. Mercer's pulse ticked up. "What is it, boy?" he murmured under his breath, the words barely leaving his lips. Ranger's nose lifted a fraction of an inch. The scent wasn't strong, but it was wrong, metallic, sharp, layered beneath recycled air and human sweat. It reminded him of places where the ground burned and the sky roared, places where men screamed without sound. The aircraft leveled off at cruising altitude. A flight attendant passed by, heels clicking softly, offering drinks. Ranger remained still, but his eyes tracked her until she moved out of view. Then his gaze drifted forward, locking on the closed cockpit door. Mercer noticed. He followed Ranger's line of sight, forcing himself to relax his shoulders. The cockpit was sealed, reinforced, impenetrable to passengers. That knowledge should have comforted him. It didn't. The radio was clipped beneath his jacket, secured against his ribs. Mercer hadn't even realized he was wearing it anymore. Old habits died hard. He told himself it was useless now, that the frequency it monitored had been dead for years. The radio crackled. Just once. So faint Mercer almost convinced himself it was interference. A harmless burst of static. The kind that happened on long flights when equipment crossed invisible lines in the sky. Ranger's head snapped up. The dog rose from the floor with controlled precision, unfolding his body silently and settling into a sit beside Mercer's legs. His posture was perfect, alert but not aggressive, calm but ready. Passengers glanced over, smiling at the well-trained animal. Mercer didn't smile back. His hand slid casually toward his jacket, fingers brushing the radio through the fabric. His heart began to pound, not with fear but recognition. That sound, compressed, clipped, deliberate, was not random. It was intentional. The radio crackled again, longer this time. Mercer tilted his head slightly, pretending to adjust his collar as he eased the volume down to a whisper only he could hear. "Mercer, Captain Jack Mercer, if you can hear this, acknowledge." Mercer's blood ran cold. The voice was male, calm, controlled, American. There was no background noise, no wind, no engines, no chaos. Whoever was speaking was stationary, secure, confident. Very confident. Mercer stared straight ahead, jaw tightening until his teeth ached. He didn't respond. Responding meant admitting that the past had found him. Responding meant breaking the promise he had made to himself. Ranger leaned closer, his shoulder pressing lightly against Mercer's leg. The contact grounded him, pulled him back into the moment. Mercer exhaled slowly through his nose. The voice returned, sharper now. "Captain Mercer, confirm asset status. This channel is no longer dormant." Mercer's hand closed around the radio. The term asset was not used lightly. It never referred to equipment. It referred to living things, things trained to operate where laws didn't reach and mistakes cost lives. Slowly, Mercer lifted the radio, shielding it with his palm as if adjusting a belt buckle. "Negative acknowledgement," he whispered. "You have the wrong channel." There was a pause, long enough to make Mercer's skin prickle. Then the voice replied, quieter, almost respectful. "There is no wrong channel for this, sir. Protocol has been reactivated." Mercer swallowed hard. Around him, the cabin remained oblivious. A man laughed too loudly at something on his phone. The flight attendant poured wine. The baby across the aisle hiccuped, then giggled. Ranger's gaze never wavered from the cockpit door. Mercer felt sweat bead at the base of his neck. "Protocol was buried," Mercer murmured, "along with everything else." "Not buried," the voice corrected, paused. The radio emitted a soft tone, an identifier Mercer hadn't heard since a night raid outside Kandahar. His grip tightened until his knuckles whitened. Ranger's tail thumped once against the floor, not happy, not nervous, ready. Mercer closed his eyes for half a second. "How did you find me?" he asked. Another pause. "Because we need you," the voice said, "and because the Black Hound is awake." Mercer's eyes snapped open. Ranger rose to his feet, muscles coiling beneath aging skin, every instinct screaming that the hunt had begun. Mercer felt the plane shudder gently as it cut through thin air, 35,000 feet above the ground, and understood with a sinking certainty that whatever had followed him onto this flight was already too close. And somewhere in the cabin, something dangerous had just realized it was no longer alone. The hum of the engines filled the cabin, but it no longer sounded ordinary. Mercer's heart pounded in sync with it, a silent drum signaling imminent danger. Ranger's ears twitched independently, scanning every creak of the fuselage, every subtle vibration from the metal skin of the aircraft. He shifted, moving with silent precision, as though every inch of the cabin had been mapped in his mind before he was even born. His paws barely made a sound against the carpeted floor. Mercer tightened his grip on the radio. He knew the channel was monitored, but that didn't make it less real. He hadn't heard that voice in over a decade, not since nights spent crawling through mud, rain soaking his uniform, the world lit by nothing more than flares and the fear of a teammate's life depending on a single move. The protocol, the call signs, the code words, they weren't part of civilian life. They weren't part of normalcy. And yet here they were, invading his carefully constructed quiet existence. The passengers remained oblivious. Children laughed at cartoons, couples chatted quietly, and the flight attendants moved gracefully down the aisle, offering drinks and smiles. No one noticed the tension that had coiled in Mercer's chest. nor the predatory intensity that now radiated from Ranger. From the outside, they appeared to be just another retired soldier and his aging dog on a cross-country flight. Inside, the air was charged with anticipation, every second stretching taut like a drawn bowstring. Mercer's mind raced. Who could have activated the protocol? The voice had identified him directly, a precision that only came from someone with intimate knowledge of past operations. Could it be someone from his SEAL team? No. They were accounted for dead, retired, or disappeared into classified assignments. Then the realization hit him, chilling him from the inside out. The call wasn't for him alone. It was for Ranger, the Black Hound. Ranger's eyes narrowed. He had heard the name before many times in situations where every second counted, where hesitation meant death. The call had been dormant for years, sealed in Mercer's memory like an unspoken warning. But now it was active again, awakened by forces Mercer wasn't yet ready to face. Ranger shifted closer to Mercer's leg, his body vibrating with barely contained energy, ears flicking toward the back of the cabin. Something, or someone, was there. Mercer's thoughts were interrupted by another crackle of static. The radio hissed before the voice spoke again, calm but carrying unmistakable authority. "Captain Mercer, the Black Hound protocol is now in effect. Asset activation required." The words weren't a request. They were an order, one that left no room for hesitation. Mercer's hand went to his jacket pocket, brushing over the familiar weight of the radio controls. He hadn't expected this. Not here, not now, at 35,000 feet, surrounded by civilians who could never understand what was about to unfold. A subtle tension ran through the cabin. Mercer knew he had seconds to assess the threat, yet every instinct screamed that time was slipping away faster than he could measure. He studied the passengers, eyes darting quickly yet discreetly, searching for irregularities, suspicious movements, nervous fidgets, anything out of place. Most people were engaged in ordinary routines, oblivious to the predator's gaze. But one man in the rear section sat unusually still, hands clenched on his lap, eyes hidden behind mirrored sunglasses. Mercer's pulse quickened. That man was the anomaly. That man was the threat. Ranger's low growl vibrated through the floor, subtle yet unmistakable. Mercer's fingers tightened around the radio, his thumb hovering over the transmission button. He needed confirmation that the threat had been detected, that Ranger was ready, that the protocol could proceed without unnecessary risk to the innocent passengers surrounding them. He leaned closer to Ranger, voice low, almost a whisper. "Do you see him, boy?" Ranger's eyes never wavered. His ears twitched. The tail thumped twice, short, precise, alert. The answer was clear, yes. Mercer exhaled slowly, forcing himself to maintain composure. He had faced countless life-and-death scenarios before, but never in such a confined, crowded space. The stakes were exponentially higher. One misstep could result in catastrophe. And yet, despite the danger, despite the potential for chaos, he felt a surge of grim determination. This was their world. This was their fight, and they would face it together. The radio hissed again, the static slicing through the cabin's calm. "Captain Mercer," the voice said, tone sharper, more urgent, "asset must engage immediately. Delay is not an option. Confirm." Mercer's jaw tightened. Delay was not an option. He knew what that meant. He swallowed hard and spoke the words that had been buried in memory, buried under years of civilian life, buried under hope for quiet. "Black Hound." The moment the words left his lips, the entire cabin seemed to shift. Ranger rose to his feet, muscles rippling under sleek black fur, eyes burning with a familiar, deadly intelligence. He was no longer the retired companion passengers had assumed him to be. He was a weapon honed by years of service, tempered by battles Mercer could never forget. He moved with purpose, silent and precise, aware of every inch of space, every human within it, every potential threat. Mercer's heart raced, not with fear but with recognition. The game had begun. Ranger's presence transformed the ordinary airplane into a battlefield. The man in the rear row shifted slightly, an almost imperceptible movement that sent a spike of adrenaline through Mercer. That man had just realized something was wrong. Too late, too late. Ranger's head swiveled toward him, ears forward, muscles coiled like springs. The dog's growl, barely audible, sent a ripple of unease through the surrounding passengers. Mercer's gaze locked with Ranger, and he knew with absolute certainty that the next moments would define them both. Somewhere in the cabin, a child giggled at a cartoon. A man reached for his drink. But for Mercer and Ranger, the world had narrowed to a single point. The man who now understood he was no longer invisible. And at 35,000 feet, with nowhere to run, the silent predator had already begun his approach. The plane shuddered slightly, as if sensing the tension. Mercer tightened his grip on the radio and whispered once more, voice low and steady despite the storm within. "Black Hound, engage." Ranger's eyes glinted with steel. His paws shifted, silent against the carpet. Every muscle, every nerve, every ounce of his being was now focused on the task ahead. The cabin was ordinary. The passengers were ordinary. But what Mercer and Ranger were about to unleash was anything but ordinary. The radio crackled one last time before silence, as if the world itself was holding its breath. And then, from the rear of the plane, a faint movement, a subtle twitch of the hand beneath the suspicious man's jacket, made Ranger's ears flatten instantly. The predator was ready. The hunt had begun. Suspense hung in the cabin like an invisible fog, and the next second would change everything. Ranger's body coiled like a spring. The gentle, aging dog everyone assumed was retired had vanished. In his place stood a predator, lean, taut, and alert to every detail of the cabin. His muscles rippled beneath the black coat, eyes burning with a sharp intelligence that seemed almost human. One paw shifted slightly forward, and the carpet beneath barely rustled. Mercer's heart raced as he watched the transformation, pride and fear warring in equal measure. Years of training, of missions in hostile lands, were condensed into this moment. Ranger was ready. Mercer's fingers tightened on the radio, thumb hovering over the button, but he knew the words would not command the dog now. Ranger didn't need orders. Black Hound had a mind of his own, honed over years of service in some of the deadliest situations imaginable. All Mercer had to do was stay alive and keep the civilians safe. The rest, Ranger's instincts, his precision, would follow naturally. The man in the rear rows remained seated, almost frozen, eyes darting nervously under mirrored sunglasses. His hands rested near his waist, concealed beneath a heavy jacket. Mercer's pulse accelerated. The radio had already warned. Explosive components likely assembled. Cabin pressure is your enemy. The weight of those words sank in. At this altitude, at 35,000 feet, a single mistake, a single misstep could be catastrophic. Lives hung by a thread. Ranger's gaze locked on the man. He moved with deliberate stealth, paws silent against the carpet, weaving between the rows of seats as though the cabin itself had been mapped into his mind. Every passenger's movement registered, every shift of weight, every flinch. To any civilian, it might look like a dog simply exploring, but Mercer knew better. Ranger's eyes narrowed, ears forward, tail still but tense. The dog had already assessed the threat, calculated the angles, and decided the method of engagement. Mercer followed with his eyes, keeping a discreet distance. His voice was a whisper. "Ranger, stay on him." The dog's head flicked slightly, acknowledging the silent command. He was already 2 rows ahead, positioning himself strategically between the suspect and the rest of the passengers. The man shifted, suddenly aware. Mercer felt the air change. Panic, the subtle adrenaline spike, the shift in body language. These were Ranger's signals, and Mercer read them instinctively. Then it happened. The suspect moved. His hand slipped beneath his jacket. A faint metallic click echoed, barely audible over the hum of the engines, but Mercer heard it. Ranger's low growl vibrated through the floor. It wasn't just a warning, it was a declaration. The dog lunged forward, teeth bared, muscles coiling for impact, forcing the man to stagger back against his seat. Passengers gasped, some recoiling, some frozen in terror. Mercer's pulse thundered in his ears. Mercer's training kicked in. He lunged, intercepting the man's arm with a practiced sweep, but Ranger was faster, more precise. The dog's body pinned the suspect's legs to the floor, forcing him into an awkward crouch. The man's eyes widened in shock and fear. For the first time in years, Mercer felt the full force of adrenaline, the sharp edge of real danger. This wasn't a drill. This wasn't a mission with backup waiting outside. They were trapped, 35,000 feet above the ground, and the device beneath the man's jacket could kill everyone in the cabin. Ranger's teeth snapped dangerously close to the man's wrist. Mercer could see the tension in the man's arm, the subtle movement of wires beneath the jacket. "Stop," Mercer hissed, placing himself between the dog and the suspect. Ranger didn't hesitate. The low, menacing growl continued, a warning that the dog was in complete control. Every instinct told the man to stop, every fiber of Ranger's being told him this was life or death. The passengers screamed, unaware of the precise danger. Children clutched blankets, mothers shielded infants, businessmen ducked behind seats. Mercer's mind raced. One wrong move, 1 second too long, and the plane could be lost. He could hear the faint static of the radio again, but the voice was drowned out by Ranger's growl and the sudden chaos. "Captain, if that device arms, you lose altitude control," the voice finally cut through. Mercer's heart sank. Time was slipping. He knew what the voice meant. The device wasn't fully stable. One wrong motion, one accidental trigger, and the cabin would be destroyed before anyone could react. Mercer looked at Ranger, meeting the dog's eyes, and understood. They both knew the risk. Ranger would not let anyone die, not on his watch. The man tried to move, desperate now, and Ranger reacted instantly, slamming into him, forcing him into the aisle. Metal clinked, part of the man's jacket brushing against the seat frame, and Mercer flinched. He could feel every second as a countdown, each tick louder than the engines themselves. Ranger's growl deepened, vibrating through the dog's chest and into Mercer's legs. Every passenger, every inch of the cabin was a potential casualty. The radio hissed again. "Black Hound protocol requires separation." Mercer froze. He knew the meaning. It was a contingency for extreme situations. The dog might have to sacrifice himself to contain the device to ensure the safety of the passengers. Mercer shook his head, heart pounding. "No," he whispered. "Not you." But Ranger's eyes betrayed no hesitation. The dog inched closer to the suspect, muscles coiled for the inevitable confrontation, aware that the next move would determine life or death. Mercer took a breath, steadying himself. The cabin was chaos wrapped in a fragile shell of air. Ranger had become more than a companion. He was a shield, a weapon, and a guardian, all in one. And yet, Mercer knew, deep down, that whatever happened next could change everything. Somewhere behind them, passengers continued to panic, unaware of the precise danger at hand. Mercer glanced at the cockpit, then back to Ranger. Every instinct screamed that the critical moment was coming, and there would be no time to second-guess. Ranger's head swiveled sharply toward the man, teeth flashing in a silent warning. His body was coiled, ready to strike. The man's hand twitched again beneath his jacket. Mercer's breath caught. The next second would decide who survived. Suspense hung thick, each heartbeat louder than the plane's engines. The hunt had truly begun. Mercer's eyes never left Ranger. The dog moved like liquid shadow, muscles rippling under sleek black fur, each step precise, each motion calculated. The man in the rear row froze, realizing too late that the predator he had underestimated was fully awake, fully trained, and utterly unrelenting. Ranger positioned himself strategically between the suspect and the rest of the cabin, the growl low and resonant, vibrating through the floor, through the seats, through Mercer's very bones. Passengers glanced nervously at the dog, mistaking his readiness for excitement or play. No one understood. No one could. Mercer's fingers brushed the radio, trying to catch the faint static of the voice guiding them, but the plane's hum swallowed it. He leaned slightly forward, eyes sweeping across the aisle. Families were panicked, mothers clutching children, fathers frozen mid-reach for a seatbelt. The flight attendants had begun murmured reassurances, but their eyes darted toward the chaos behind them. Mercer swallowed hard. There was no room for error, no room for mistakes. Every inch mattered, every breath mattered. The suspect's hand twitched again, fingers brushing the metallic surface hidden beneath his jacket. Mercer saw it, just a flicker, but it was enough. Ranger's growl escalated, low and deliberate, warning clear. The man's eyes widened. Sweat dotted his brow. His training, his preparation, his confidence, all vanished in the presence of the dog. Ranger wasn't just a dog. He was a weapon, a guardian, a force of nature distilled into a living being. Mercer rose slightly, sliding his shoulder against the aisle seat, using it as leverage to keep a clear line of sight. He whispered, "Stay ready, boy." Ranger's ears twitched. The dog's gaze never wavered, locked on the suspect, analyzing, calculating, predicting. Mercer's pulse hammered. He knew what had to happen, but executing it with civilians trapped in the cabin was a nightmare scenario no training could fully prepare him for. The suspect moved again, slow and cautious, trying to reach beneath his jacket. A flight attendant stepped toward him, attempting to calm him, and Mercer's stomach dropped. He could not allow civilians to be endangered. He moved faster, intercepting her path, whispering back, "Stay behind the line." The woman froze, her eyes wide with terror, comprehension dawning too late. Mercer's hands went back to the man as Ranger lunged, slamming into the suspect's legs and forcing him backward against the aisle seats. Metal clinked as the suspect hit the frame of a chair. Mercer's stomach twisted. That slight movement could have triggered the device. He ducked low, grabbing the man's wrist, twisting, pulling, leveraging his weight. Ranger pressed his body against the man, teeth flashing, a silent reminder that any wrong motion could mean disaster. The suspect struggled, thrashing, cursing in a low, guttural language Mercer recognized from operations long buried in memory. It was desperate, animalistic. Fear and intent collided in a dangerous storm. The passengers screamed, instinctively recoiling, some pressing against the seatbacks, some covering children's ears, some too paralyzed to move. Mercer's heart pounded in his ears. He could hear the faint static of the radio again, the voice now sharper, almost urgent. "Captain, if that device arms, you lose altitude control. Immediate containment required." Mercer's throat tightened. He knew the weight of those words. At 35,000 feet, 1 second could be the difference between life and death for everyone on board. Ranger's growl intensified. His paws shifted under him, adjusting weight, blocking potential movement from the suspect. Mercer could see the tension radiating from the man. He was trying to hide the panic behind controlled movements, but Ranger saw it all. The dog's head pressed against the suspect's chest, forcing him into a crouch, teeth glinting in the dim cabin light. Mercer's grip was firm on the wrist, controlling the arm nearest the wires concealed beneath the jacket. One wrong pull, one sudden jerk, and the cabin could erupt in fire and smoke. Mercer's mind raced. He needed to subdue the man without triggering the device, without harming civilians. He scanned the cabin quickly. Every seat, every person, every inch had to be accounted for. There was no escape. The aisle was blocked by Ranger, the seats packed with terrified passengers. The galley doors were too narrow. The cockpit was sealed. The plane was a cage, a ticking time bomb with no room for error. The suspect tried to resist, spinning slightly, but Ranger was faster. The dog's teeth found the man's jacket just below his chest, snagging the fabric without harming flesh, a controlled grip designed to immobilize. Mercer leveraged the motion, twisting the man toward the rear of the plane, trying to gain distance from passengers while keeping the suspect's arms under control. The man's eyes darted, realizing he had underestimated the dog, underestimated Mercer, underestimated the impossible odds stacked against him. Suddenly, the plane shuddered violently, tossing drinks and loose items into the air. Passengers screamed. Mercer pressed closer to Ranger, who remained perfectly poised, a living shield. The suspect gasped, a sharp intake of breath that revealed panic had taken over calculation. Mercer's heart hammered. He knew the next second could be the moment of truth. The radio crackled sharply. "Black Hound protocol requires separation," the voice said. Mercer froze, understanding the grim reality. Separation meant Ranger might have to place himself in direct danger to protect the passengers and contain the threat. Mercer shook his head, despair and determination battling within him. "No, not him," he whispered. But Ranger's eyes reflected only focus, unwavering loyalty and readiness to act. Mercer inhaled slowly, bracing himself. The man struggled again, desperate, fumbling with the device hidden beneath his jacket. Ranger pressed closer, teeth and body poised to neutralize the threat. Mercer's muscles tensed, prepared for any sudden movement. Every instinct screamed, "Stay calm, protect civilians, trust the dog." The cabin was chaos, the suspect panicked, the dog ready. Mercer glanced at the cockpit, still sealed, still unaware, and back at Ranger. Every second stretched, each one louder than the engines themselves. And then, a subtle click from beneath the suspect's jacket made Mercer's blood run cold. The device had been armed. Passengers screamed anew, unaware that the real battle had only just begun and that there was nowhere for anyone to hide. Ranger's growl deepened, resonating with controlled fury. Mercer tightened his grip on the man's wrist, heart racing, and realized with stark clarity there was no room to run. Not for him, not for Ranger, not for anyone on the plane. The cabin erupted into chaos. Screams ricocheted off the walls, the hum of the engines drowned out by panic. Mercer's heart pounded in his chest, a drumbeat of urgency and fear. He could see the sheer terror on passengers' faces, mothers clutching children, men shielding their wives, people too shocked to move. But for Mercer, there was only one focus, the suspect and the device beneath his jacket. Every inch of the cabin was a potential disaster zone, and every second was a knife's edge. Ranger pressed against the man, body coiled like a spring, teeth flashing in calculated restraint. The dog's growl was low, vibrating through the floor, the seats, the very air, a warning no human could misinterpret. The suspect froze, realizing that he had underestimated the animal. The device beneath his jacket was no longer a secret. Ranger had detected it instantly, and Mercer knew the dog would not hesitate to act if the threat escalated. Mercer lunged, grabbing the suspect's wrist, but Ranger was faster, blocking every move with precision that seemed impossible for a dog of his age. Mercer's mind raced. Every strategy he had learned over decades in combat had to be condensed into this moment. He couldn't risk pulling the device accidentally. One wrong motion, one slip, and 35,000 feet of cabin air could turn into a fiery death trap. The suspect cursed under his breath, switching languages rapidly, as if speaking would delay the inevitable. Sweat ran down his face, mingling with fear and frustration. He fumbled, trying to calculate his next move, but Ranger anticipated every motion, shifting to maintain leverage, pressing closer, his teeth brushing the man's jacket without causing injury. Every passenger within 10 feet felt the intensity radiating from the dog, though none fully understood what they were witnessing. Mercer pressed down on the suspect's arm, careful not to disturb the wires beneath. "It's over," he hissed, voice low, controlled, but his tone carried the weight of authority only years of combat could forge. Ranger's eyes never left the man, pupils sharp and calculating, muscles taut beneath the black coat. The dog was more than a guardian. He was an executor of precise, controlled force, trained to neutralize threats without collateral damage whenever possible. The flight attendants froze in the aisles, unsure where to go, what to do. Mercer's mind ran through contingencies: secure the passengers, isolate the suspect, contain the device. But there was only one chance for success, and it relied on the seamless coordination between him and Ranger. The dog's instincts were flawless. Mercer's experience guided the human element. Together, they were a unit forged through countless missions, now facing a threat in a civilian sky. The suspect shifted again, subtle, almost imperceptible, and Mercer reacted instinctively, twisting the arm to redirect movement. Ranger pressed forward, teeth flashing, legs braced, forcing the man backward toward the galley. Passengers screamed, ducked, and clutched one another as the confrontation became a physical ballet of calculated precision. Mercer could feel the tension radiating from Ranger, every muscle tuned for the split-second reaction required to prevent disaster. Suddenly the plane hit turbulence, jostling the entire cabin violently. Drinks spilled, magazines fluttered, oxygen masks dipped slightly from their compartments. Mercer's grip tightened. The man's arm flailed, wires beneath the jacket brushing against exposed metal of the seat frame. A spark could ignite a chain reaction. Mercer's eyes met Ranger, and he felt the unspoken communication. Move now, protect the innocent, neutralize the threat. Mercer took a deep breath, grounding himself, as Ranger lunged with controlled force, pinning the man's torso against the galley bulkhead. The suspect thrashed violently, eyes wide, realizing that the dog was no ordinary animal. He was the Black Hound, the living embodiment of Mercer's past missions, trained to predict, anticipate, and neutralize threats with precision. And he was unstoppable. The suspect's hand twitched again, attempting to reach for the device. Ranger reacted instantly, teeth snapping inches from the man's wrist, stopping him in a motion too fast for any human eye to track. Mercer's heart hammered. The radio crackled in the background, barely audible over the chaos. "Captain, if that device arms, you lose altitude control. Immediate action required." Mercer's stomach dropped. He knew what that meant. There was no time to think. Every second now could mean catastrophe. Ranger's growl deepened, reverberating through the cabin. The suspect froze, realizing the gravity of his predicament. Mercer shifted slightly, pushing the man's shoulder down, attempting to immobilize him further. The plane lurched again, throwing unsecured items across the aisle. Mercer caught a briefcase midair, setting it aside without breaking focus. Ranger mirrored his movements, adjusting his position to maintain control while keeping the suspect in check. Mercer's mind raced. If the device detonated, passengers, crew, and the aircraft would be lost in seconds. The confined space offered no escape. The only solution was containment, precise, controlled, unflinching. Ranger was that solution. Mercer's heart ached at the thought that the dog might have to put himself directly in harm's way to protect everyone. He whispered, barely audible, "Not you, boy, not you." But Ranger's eyes betrayed no hesitation. Loyalty and instinct had replaced fear. Every muscle coiled, every nerve alert. The dog's head pressed against the man, constraining movement, teeth poised, body braced. Mercer pressed on the wrist, twisting carefully, guiding the man toward the rear of the plane. The device beneath the jacket was exposed just enough to reveal its danger. Sparks of panic flickered across the suspect's eyes. Suddenly, a sharp metallic click echoed through the aisle. Mercer froze. His blood ran cold. The device had been triggered. Every passenger screamed, diving under seats, clutching each other, desperate for safety. Mercer's heart hammered, lungs tight with tension. Ranger growled louder, bracing himself, ready to absorb whatever risk was necessary. The plane's lights flickered briefly as turbulence shook the cabin. Mercer's voice cut through the chaos, low and commanding. "Hold still. Stay calm. We stop this now." Ranger's growl shifted to a warning bark, controlled, precise, aimed at the suspect. The man realized he had no options left. His body tensed, movement limited, every instinct screaming that the Black Hound would not allow him to act again. Mercer's mind was a razor's edge of calculation and fear. He knew the next few seconds would decide everything, whether lives were saved or lost. Ranger pressed closer, muscles taut, eyes locked on the device, teeth inches from disaster. Mercer's hands adjusted again, twisting the suspect's wrist, guiding him, controlling him, all while keeping the device as stable as possible. The cabin was frozen in a tense, suffocating moment. Screams mixed with the hum of engines, the growls of a dog, the sharp intakes of terrified passengers. At 35,000 feet, with no room to move and no margin for error, Mercer and Ranger faced the ultimate test of skill, courage, and instinct. Then, just as Mercer prepared for the worst, Ranger shifted slightly, eyes narrowing with lethal focus. The suspect's jaw dropped in sudden realization, too late. The dog had already made the decision, and the cabin would never be the same again. Suspense crackled through the air. Every heartbeat mattered. Every second could be the last. The next move would determine life or death. The chaos in the cabin had reached a fever pitch. Screams echoed off the metal walls, drinks spilled in torrents, and the faint smell of fear mixed with recycled air. Mercer's muscles burned with tension, every fiber primed for action, but his eyes never left Ranger. The dog had transformed completely, no longer the aging companion of domestic life, but a veteran warrior, honed by years of missions that Mercer could barely speak about. The black hound had awakened, and he was fully in control. Ranger's body was pressed against the suspect, constraining his movements with terrifying precision. Teeth glinted, but no flesh was harmed. Every motion was calculated. Every growl was a warning. Mercer could see the panic rising in the man's eyes, the sweat glistening, the futile attempts to manipulate the device beneath his jacket. The plane jolted slightly, turbulence adding unpredictable forces, and Mercer's stomach dropped. Any sudden move could trigger the bomb, but Ranger was unfazed. The dog's instincts were absolute. Mercer's hands gripped the suspect's wrist, twisting carefully, leveraging his weight. His knuckles whitened as adrenaline surged. He had faced firefights in deserts, mountains, and urban war zones, but nothing compared to the vulnerability of 35,000 feet above the ground, with civilians trapped in a metal tube. He whispered under his breath, a mantra from years of conditioning: precision, patience, protect. The suspect cursed in fragmented languages, his voice harsh and desperate, trying to regain control. He thrashed, his body a dangerous mix of panic and aggression. Mercer held firm, guiding him toward the galley, the only open space with some room to maneuver. Ranger mirrored every move, body pressed tight, teeth inches from danger, paws braced against the floor to absorb any sudden motion. Every second, every breath was a battle for containment. Mercer's eyes flicked to the passengers. Mothers pressed children to their chests, men shielded partners, some froze, paralyzed by terror. He could do nothing but keep the dog and the suspect between them and disaster. Each movement was a calculated risk. The radio crackled faintly, the voice now urgent. Black Hound protocol requires containment. Civilian safety is paramount. Asset may be at risk. Mercer swallowed hard. That meant Ranger might have to place himself directly in harm's way. His heart ached. Ranger whimpered once, not from fear, but from effort, from the raw physical and emotional strain. Mercer could feel the dog's loyalty radiating through every muscle, every sinew. The Black Hound had never failed. He would not fail now. Mercer pressed forward, twisting the suspect toward the rear of the plane, toward the galley door, every inch a meticulous chess move. The man struggled, but Ranger anticipated, countered, and guided him with the precision of a seasoned operative. Suddenly the plane jolted violently. Objects flew into the air. Drinks spilled, magazines scattered, passengers screamed. Mercer's chest tightened, adrenaline spiking. The suspect's hand twitched again toward the device. Ranger reacted instantly, pressing his body against the man's chest, teeth brushing dangerously close, stopping the movement mid-motion. Mercer adjusted his grip, careful not to trigger the wires. His mind raced. Every contingency he had rehearsed in his career condensed into the next few seconds. The suspect's eyes widened in sudden comprehension. He realized he was outmatched, not just by Mercer's human strength, but by the dog's tactical brilliance. Every instinct told him he could not act without triggering his own destruction. Ranger growled, a sound vibrating through the cabin, the very air filled with lethal intent. Mercer's heart pounded, sweat running down his neck, but he held firm, guiding the suspect closer to the galley, away from the innocent passengers. Mercer's mind flashed to the past, missions in Afghanistan, covert extractions in hostile cities, operations where failure meant death. He had survived because he trusted his team, because they had each other's backs. Now Ranger was his team. Ranger was the shield, the weapon, the guardian. Mercer felt a pang of dread, every second stretched, and he knew the dog could be forced to make the ultimate sacrifice. He whispered quietly, almost a prayer, "Not you, boy. Not like this." Ranger pressed forward, shifting his weight against the suspect, guiding him toward a corner of the galley. The device beneath the jacket was exposed just enough to see wires and metallic edges, every component a threat. Mercer's eyes never left it. One misstep, one sudden movement, and 35,000 feet of cabin air could ignite into catastrophe. Ranger sensed it too, muscles coiled, teeth flashing, ready to absorb any force. Mercer's mind ran through options. Disarm, too risky without time or tools. Evacuate, impossible. Neutralize, only Ranger could do it safely and he would not hesitate. Mercer's pulse pounded. The radio crackled again, warning urgent. Asset must maintain control. Civilian safety is priority. Black Hound protocol may require extreme measures. Mercer swallowed. He had always trained for situations like this, but never in a cabin filled with civilians, never at 35,000 feet. The suspect thrashed violently, realizing he had no escape. Ranger tightened his stance, pressing him into the corner, teeth glinting in the dim cabin light. Mercer adjusted the man's wrist again, guiding him with precise force. The device had been armed, sparks flickered, but Ranger's calculated pressure prevented the worst. The dog's instincts, honed over years of combat, ensured containment. Mercer glanced briefly at the passengers. Their eyes were wide, terror etched into every face. He whispered to himself, "Hold on, just hold on." Ranger pressed forward, bracing against the man's movements, absorbing force, ensuring no accidental detonation. Mercer felt the weight of responsibility crush him, but he stayed steady. The Black Hound would not fail. Suddenly, a muffled thud echoed as the plane jolted again. Ranger shifted instinctively, teeth grazing the suspect's wrist, and Mercer realized the dog had calculated the next move before Mercer even thought of it. Every muscle in the cabin seemed frozen, every second stretched to eternity. Mercer exhaled slowly. The dog's loyalty, training, and sheer courage were keeping them alive. But Mercer knew that the next moment could demand more than either of them had ever given before. Suspense hung thick in the cabin. The next heartbeat could decide life or death. Mercer's hands were raw from gripping the suspect's wrist. His knuckles were white, muscles straining as he balanced force and caution. Every second stretched impossibly, the tension in the cabin so thick it could be cut with a knife. Ranger pressed forward, body coiled, teeth inches from the device, muscles taut and ready to spring. The dog's growl vibrated through the floor, low and resonant, warning the suspect of the consequences of a single misstep. The entire plane held its collective breath, unaware of how close they were to catastrophe. Mercer glanced at the passengers, terrified faces, frozen postures, hands clutching children, heads pressed against seats. Every one of them depended on him and Ranger. There was no backup, no reinforcements, no miracle waiting at the cabin door. The device under the suspect's jacket was active, ticking silently toward a deadly conclusion. Mercer felt bile rise in his throat. He knew the radio's warning meant the dog could be forced to act in a way that would put himself in mortal danger. Ranger shifted slightly, pressing his weight more firmly against the suspect. The man struggled, realizing that his fate had narrowed down to 2 points of unyielding pressure, Mercer's hands and the Black Hound's body. The dog's eyes locked on him, pupils sharp, calculating, unwavering. Mercer could see the man's panic intensify. He was trapped, outmatched, and running out of options. Mercer weighed the unthinkable. Separation was the protocol, the radio had made it clear. Ranger might have to place himself directly in harm's way to contain the threat. His heart ached. Ranger had been by his side through decades of life and death. Mercer swallowed hard, shaking his head. "Not you," he whispered under his breath, voice breaking. But Ranger's eyes betrayed no hesitation. Loyalty and instinct ruled over fear. The dog would act without question. The suspect's hand twitched again toward the jacket. Mercer's body tensed. Any accidental movement could trigger detonation. Ranger responded instantaneously, teeth flashing, muscles bracing. The man froze in panic. The device was inches from disaster. Mercer's mind raced, considering every possible maneuver to save civilians while preserving Ranger's life. Each option was fraught with risk. There was no perfect choice, only action. Mercer's thoughts flicked back to years of covert operations. Night raids under fire, extractions where a teammate's life balanced on a knife's edge. He had never faced a situation like this, confined within a pressurized tube with 35,000 feet of air above them, civilians trapped like sardines, and a device capable of destroying it all. The weight of responsibility pressed on him, but he knew the dog's instincts were flawless. Ranger would contain the threat. A sudden jolt from turbulence threw unsecured items across the aisle. Mercer's stomach sank. The suspect attempted a last, desperate twist toward the device. Ranger reacted with blinding precision, pressing his body against the man, teeth snapping inches from the metal. Mercer's grip on the wrist tightened, guiding him toward the rear galley. Every movement had to be precise. One wrong shift, one accidental pull, and the plane could erupt in flames. The passengers screamed, ducking under seats, pressing together, covering ears. Mercer's focus narrowed to the suspect and Ranger. The dog had positioned himself perfectly, blocking escape, absorbing force, and containing danger. Mercer whispered quietly, almost pleading, "Hold on just a little longer, boy." Ranger's tail thumped once, a pulse of reassurance, a signal of unwavering focus. Mercer knew the moment had arrived. He had to make the choice: risk Ranger's life to save everyone or attempt a maneuver that could trigger the device. The dog's loyalty made the decision for him. Ranger would act first. Mercer's pulse raced, knowing he had to coordinate perfectly. He guided the man backward, pressing him toward a small corner of the galley. Ranger's teeth and body held him in place. Sparks flickered faintly from the device. Mercer's jaw clenched. He whispered one last instruction to Ranger, barely audible: "Do what you have to protect them." Ranger's eyes met Mercer's, full of understanding and fierce determination. The dog inched closer to the suspect's jacket, positioning his head over the device, bracing his body against the man with every ounce of strength. Mercer adjusted the man's wrist, twisting carefully to maintain leverage and control. The cabin was frozen, time suspended. Every passenger's breath caught, every scream muted in their minds. Outside, the engines hummed, oblivious to the crisis unfolding within. Mercer's hands ached. Ranger's body trembled from effort, but the alignment was perfect. The dog had made the ultimate choice. He was placing himself in direct danger to contain the threat. Mercer's chest tightened. He whispered again, a prayer and a command: "Hold on, boy, I've got you." Ranger's body tensed further, teeth flashing, muscles coiled. The suspect's panic reached a breaking point. He could no longer move without triggering disaster. Ranger's growl deepened, a living barrier between destruction and innocence. Mercer glanced around, seeing terrified passengers pressed into their seats, the plane teetering on the edge of disaster. The next second would decide everything. Ranger had taken the lead, fully committing to the choice Mercer had feared to make himself. There was no turning back. Every heartbeat screamed danger. Every second stretched impossibly. The Black Hound had chosen. Now only the outcome remained uncertain. The cabin held its breath. Screams had dulled to terrified gasps. Passengers pressed to seats, eyes wide, hearts pounding, as if time itself had slowed. Mercer's hands clamped firmly on the suspect's wrist, every muscle taut with anticipation. Ranger stood over the man, a black shadow of lethal precision, teeth glinting, body coiled, instincts firing faster than any human thought. The device beneath the suspect's jacket emitted a faint hiss, a signal of imminent danger. Every passenger, every ounce of air, every heartbeat was suspended over a razor's edge. Ranger shifted forward, pressing his weight into the man with perfect leverage, pinning him against the galley bulkhead. Mercer guided the suspect's hands, careful to avoid contact with the device. Sparks flickered, wires strained, and the faint smell of burnt circuitry filled the cabin. The man's eyes widened in panic, realization dawning. He had no options left. Every instinct, every plan, every preparation was useless against the Black Hound. Mercer's pulse thundered in his chest. His mind moved in rapid calculations, position, leverage, timing. He had to synchronize with Ranger, every motion coordinated, every microsecond accounted for. The dog's muscles rippled under his black coat, eyes locked on the device, body absorbing the suspect's resistance. Mercer whispered softly, voice trembling but steady, "Hold steady, we've got this." Ranger's ears flicked. tail thumped once, a signal of unwavering readiness. The suspect thrashed violently, attempting one last desperate movement. Ranger's teeth snapped inches from his wrist, a warning reinforced by sheer physical dominance. Mercer rotated the man slightly, pressing downward, aligning the suspect's body to reduce risk to the device. Sparks danced faintly from beneath the jacket. Passengers screamed, ducking instinctively, but Mercer and Ranger operated in synchronized calm, a deadly ballet amidst the chaos. Suddenly the radio crackled, voice sharp and urgent. Captain Mercer, Black Hound Protocol confirms imminent threat neutralization. Stand by for extraction and containment. Mercer's heart clenched. Extraction, containment. The words were code for what he feared. Ranger might be forced to place himself directly in harm's way to stabilize the device. Mercer swallowed hard, a lump in his throat. He could not fail. Ranger could not fail. The suspect realized too late that his resistance was futile. His hands froze above the device, panic etched across his face. Ranger pressed down, carefully applying pressure to restrict movement without triggering detonation. Every muscle in the dog's body trembled with controlled effort, absorbing force, predicting every flinch, every twitch. Mercer's grip tightened on the wrist, his own body braced against the threat. Sparks flickered again. Time stretched, each second an eternity. Mercer took a deep breath. Now or never. With precise coordination, he shifted the suspect's arm slightly, redirecting tension away from the device. Ranger followed instantaneously, adjusting his body to stabilize the suspect, muscles coiling like steel springs. Sparks danced briefly, then faded. The hiss ceased. The device was contained, the immediate threat neutralized. Passengers stared in stunned silence, unable to comprehend the precision, the danger, the life-and-death ballet that had unfolded inches from their lives. Mercer released the suspect's wrist slowly, eyes never leaving Ranger. The dog stepped back, chest heaving, muscles relaxing gradually, but eyes still alert, scanning the cabin for lingering threats. The Black Hound had survived the ordeal. Mercer exhaled slowly, leaning against the galley bulkhead, sweat dripping from his brow. His hands shook, adrenaline coursing through his veins, but relief flooded him. Ranger nudged him gently, nose pressing against his hand, eyes meeting his with unspoken understanding. They had done it. They had survived, together. The suspect slumped, defeated, under the combined force of Mercer and Ranger. Law enforcement, finally alerted via secure communications from the radio, rushed down the aisle, taking control. Mercer stepped back, watching as the man was restrained. Every passenger's fear began to transform into awe as realization dawned. They had survived a deadly threat at 35,000 feet, thanks to a bond forged in war, loyalty, and instinct. Ranger settled beside Mercer, tail wagging slightly, ears relaxed but alert. Mercer patted him gently, whispering, "Good boy, we did it." The cabin began to hum with quiet murmurs of relief. Children clutched parents, passengers whispered thanks, some crying silently. Mercer allowed himself a brief smile, pride and gratitude filling him. Ranger's eyes reflected the calm after the storm, the quiet strength of a guardian who had done his duty without hesitation. Mercer's gaze drifted to the cockpit door, thoughts racing. The Black Hound Protocol had been reactivated, a relic of past missions, a ghost of wars fought silently, but today it had saved lives. Ranger had acted without hesitation, without fear, fully embodying the term Mercer had whispered over the radio years ago. Black Hound. As law enforcement secured the suspect, passengers began to calm, conversations timid but relieved. Mercer stood, hand resting gently on Ranger's head. The dog leaned into him, loyalty unspoken but unmistakable. Mercer knew one thing with certainty. The world could throw danger at them again, anywhere, anytime. But as long as he had Ranger, the Black Hound, by his side, he would face it without fear. The plane touched down safely, engines roaring, passengers erupting into tentative applause, some crying, some shaking. Mercer guided Ranger to the exit, eyes scanning the horizon. The mission was over, but the bond, the trust, the instinct, and the courage would endure forever. In the crowd of relieved passengers, one child whispered, tugging at her mother's sleeve, "Mom, the dog saved everyone." Mercer smiled faintly, knowing the truth ran deeper than that. Ranger had done more than save lives. He had reminded them all of loyalty, courage, and the quiet, unstoppable power of the Black Hound. 35,000 feet above ground, a veteran soldier and his K-9 had faced the impossible and survived. The plane was safe, the passengers alive, and the Black Hound had once again proven why legends are born, not in comfort but in crisis. Suspense dissolved into relief, but the memory of the hunt, the loyalty, and the courage lingered, etched forever into the sky.